Здравейте, колеги! Радвам се, че днес сте тук при нас. Добре сте ни дошли на днешния вебинар, организиран от нас Клет България, заедно с колегите ни от Cambridge University Press. Казвам се Майя Цветкова и съм маркетинг специалист в Клет България и по-специално се занимавам с чуждите езици. И имам удоволствието да ви приветствам днес тук. Темата днес, която ще разглеждаме, е изключително важна, тъй като все повече учащи по английски язик си търсят начин да удостоверят техните знания чрез международно признатите изпити, конкретно на Кембридж, и особено популярни са нивата B1, B2 и C1. Като вашата роля като преподаватели е всъщност да ги подготвите по най-добрия начин, и затова този вебинар със сигурност ще ви даде ценни насоки и практични съвети за подготовката на децата, тъй като може да бъде доста предизвикателна, сложна. И да, вие всъщност няма какво на вас да ви обяснявам, най-добре мисля, че знаете. Днес имаме честа да посрещнем тук и нашия лектор от Кембридж, Бенджамин Хърбърт. Той е специалист по професионално развитие към Cambridge University Press and Assessment и има дългогодишно обучение в teacher trainer, преподаването на английски, преподава английски язик в различни държави, и днес ще ни представи всъщност ключови стратегии и идеи за ефективно справяне с задачите за разбиране на текст и употреба на езика в изпитния формат. И така, това е. Благодаря ви, че сте тук. Надявам се, че вебинара ще ви бъде полезен, вдъхновяващ. Това е от мен. Няма да отнемам повече време. Давам думата на Бенджамин. Hi, Benjamin. I'm
I
new with the word. I have some introduction short for you, but you can, of course, present yourself and start.
Great. Well, thank you. So, hello, everybody. My name is Ben, and I am a professional learning and development specialist here at Cambridge University Press and Assessment. I've been working in ESL for almost 15 years now, mainly in the Czech Republic, but also some other countries as well. And although I started as a teacher, in recent years I've moved into teacher training. I've spoken at many conferences around the Czech Republic, but I've also worked as a teacher trainer. If any of you here know the CELTA course, I worked as a CELTA trainer for a few years. And I've been at Cambridge since October. So this is my first webinar in Bulgaria, and I just want to say it's nice to meet you all. Today, I just want to quickly review the formats of the B1 preliminary, B2 first, and C1 advanced exams. Before then, looking at some materials which Cambridge University Press and Assessment offer to help your learners prepare for the exams. We'll then take a look through the exams and just look at a couple of strategies that can help you as you prepare your learners for the exams. So I'm aware that most of you are already quite familiar with the exams and how they work. So just as a refresher, I thought we could quickly look at this. So all of our exams in the main suite of exams, so B1, B2, C1, these are all aligned to the CEFR, and you see here that we have this scale. So not only do the exams match to particular levels on the CEFR, they also match to the Cambridge English scale, which you can see along the side. One of the features of our exams is that it's possible for the candidates to get different grades. So if we just take a look, for example, at the preliminary exam here in red, if a candidate takes the exam and they get between 140 and about 154 on the Cambridge English scale, that would be considered a pass. However, if they perform a little bit higher, but still within that B1 boundary, they would get a merit. But it's actually possible, if they perform very well, to get a distinction. And that distinction would actually say on their certificate that they took the B1 level exam, but that they were able to prove a B2 level of language during the exam. Similarly, in the opposite direction, if a candidate doesn't do as well as they hoped in the exam and they perform just a little bit less well, less than is enough to be considered a pass, as long as there's evidence there that they scored between 120 and 140 on the Cambridge English scale, that will be recorded on their certificate. And it will say that they at least provided evidence that they have met the standards required for the A2 level. As I'm sure you're all aware, the exams are divided into four papers. So for the preliminary exam, we have reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And this exam, because it's a slightly lower level, doesn't take quite as long as the other exams. And the reading section does include one or two types of question, which in other exams would be considered part of the use of English. At B2 first level, as you can see, reading has now changed to reading and use of English. And there's more time for the writing, the listening, and the speaking parts of the exam. The trend continues with the C1 Advanced, whereas you can see there's that little bit longer for the reading and use of English, as there's an extra task. And although there's still 2 tasks for the writing, that there's always 2 tasks, but here, again, there's a bit more time, and the listening and the speaking remain. Yeah, just moving on. Let's start by taking a look at what materials Cambridge offer that can help you as you prepare your learners to take these quite important and quite high stakes exams. So today we're going to look at these in particular. So I'll start by looking at Complete. Complete is a course book. It can be taken over an entire academic year of study. And it's called Complete because it not only prepares learners for the exam, but it also has some language development work included in that as well. So this course book is really quite well suited to those learners who are aiming to take the exam, but who, in addition to learning the exam techniques, they also need to develop their level of language. And later on today, as we go through this presentation, you'll see that I've included lots of examples from Complete so that you can see how it works. Another publication we have is Compact. Now, Compact is a little bit different in that, as its name suggests, it's very much focused on kind of having all of that exam preparation condensed into a shorter period of time. So Compact, although it's designed as a course book, is very much focused on preparing students for the exams when they already have the required level of English. So the relative amount of work on language is a lot less, and the relative amount of exam preparation is increased. We also have a variety of practice tests and also some additional material in the trainer series, which we'll look at shortly. So I've included a QR code, which you can use to access this information about this material online after the webinar, and I'll make sure to provide my slides to the organizers. So you don't need to take any screenshots or anything now. I'll provide the slides later. So turning to the practice tests that I mentioned, the practice tests come in two formats. Just as it just so happens, the exams. So I think one thing you do need to think about as you're preparing your learners for the exams is actually what format of exam they will take. At the moment, we offer paper-based exams, but we also offer digital exams. And the digital exams do have some advantages, such as quicker turnaround times in terms of the marking. However, if you want to prepare your learners and you want some extra material in the form of practice tests for each of the levels of exam, we do have these books in the practice test series. All of these books come with 4 full practice tests. So the reading or reading and use of English, listening, writing, and speaking, complete with all of the material that you would need. So the audio, the pictures, so the speaking exams, for example. They include answers, and they also, in the case of the writing, also have sample answers, which also include some comments from the examiner. These tests have, because they've been written by Cambridge, they're written to the same standard as the tests in real life. So because they're from the same team that make the exams, you know that the tests are quite accurate in terms of how they correspond to what your students are likely to encounter in the exam. I myself, when I was a teacher, I often used these with my learners as we were approaching the end of academic years when I was preparing them for the exams. A counterpart to this and again, there's a QR code. The counterpart to this in the digital world are the authentic digital practice tests. So I thought we could just quickly watch this video here, and you'll see just how the digital test works and what the interface looks like for your learners as they use them.
Give students the closest experience to Cambridge English Qualifications Digital. Use the authentic digital practice test as a mock exam. Control access and monitor their progress and save time with auto marking, giving results in under 5 minutes. Our CEFR report helps you understand students' readiness and decide which areas to focus on. Cambridge Digital Practice Materials, the perfect practice for the preferred exam experience.
Okay, so not only do these authentic digital practice tests give your learners authentic practice at the exam, but as you saw in that video, there's also the option that you as a teacher can see what immediately at the blink of an eye, what parts of the exam your class as a whole perhaps find more challenging. And so it can help inform your teaching moving on. You can also see how individual students do in the tests. So it really can help you as you're planning forward and thinking about what you need to focus on as a teacher. If you're interested in these digital practice tests,
Give students the
I've included a QR code. And so you can find more information there, and you can also find more information from CLET, who I'm sure will be happy to provide you. Continuing on if you are interested in finding out just any more information about these digital qualifications and how they work, I've included some QR codes here. So there's a QR code for the general information on Cambridge English Qualifications Digital, but also if you're preparing your learners for these, there's also a QR code for a page for teachers with some help and advice on that. Another product we have for giving your learners extra practice for the exam is something called Test and Train. Now, Test and Train, again, it includes exam practice, but it's been embedded into Cambridge One. And so for certain products that we have, so for example, Complete and Compact, but also other exam preparation course books, Test and Train comes as part of that course on Cambridge One. We'll watch the video now just to see, so you can see how it works. Again, there's many useful features here, both for you as teachers, but also for your learners. And it's something which, although it's bundled with the course books, you can also request independent access to it. And again, that can be done either through Cambridge or through CLET. So let's take a look.
Test and Train is included with all Cambridge exam course digital packs. First, we will look at the student experience of Test and Train. Here, the student can see My Progress, My Homework, and Test and Train exam practice. The student can access exam practice at any time for exam task training. This is a reading and use of English task. Hints and tips help guide the student through the task. As students work their way through the questions, students can slide the text in and out. Students select the correct answers and then check. Students click on the menu at the top to select the exam paper and part that they want to focus on. This is a listening task. Students listen to the audio and then answer questions. The audio always stays in view. Writing and speaking tasks include model answers, examiner comments, hints, and a speaking test video. All of the tasks in the listening, reading, and use of English sections are auto-marked. The student can see first score and highest score and attempt each task as many times as they want. As a teacher, you can monitor your students' progress in Test and Train in the Cambridge One Class Data View. You can preview all the content on Test and Train, including the timed practice test. Your students can only see this test after you decide to assign it. Assignments is where you set tasks for homework. You can also assign the timed practice test. All assignments include a deadline. The assignments you set appear in your students' My Homework section. I hope you have enjoyed this walkthrough of Test and Train on Cambridge One. For more information about Test and Train or our exam courses, go to cambridge.org/testandtrain.
Okay, so I hope you can
Test and Train.
I hope you can see this is a really powerful resource which you can use. There's all that material which your learners can access themselves, but also as teachers, you have that control over when they get certain practice test material. And because it's all auto-marked, it just makes it so much easier for you as a teacher, again, to be able to see how your class is doing as a whole, but also if there are any particular individual learners that might have particular issues. So yeah, I think another another feature of this, which is really quite useful, is the way that it is mobile friendly. So whereas the authentic digital practice tests allow you to almost like stage a mock exam in a slightly more like formal environment, thus preparing your learners for what it's actually like to be in the exam hall. This testing train can just be used on the go. They can do their homework maybe on the way home from school, on the bus, for example. So it just opens up a whole world of options, and it just makes getting that exam practice done that little bit easier. Earlier, I mentioned trainers. So we have a series of these trainer books. Now, these are a little bit like the authentic exam practice books, but they're a little bit different. These books contain 6 full practice exams, so all 4 parts of the exam. But for the first 2 tests, as well as providing that practice, there's also a lot of support for the learners. So there is some kind of help, some advice on like tips for how to deal with each question. Before in practice tests 3 to 6, the learners are just like left to do those unaided. So these are quite similar to those authentic practice materials, but just with a couple of tests at the beginning where there's some help in terms of technique. For this part of the webinar, we could maybe just take a look at some parts of the test and what's involved and how Complete actually can help us prepare our students for the test of the exam, sorry, in this regard. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with the format of the writing test. So there's always 2 parts to the writing test, and the candidates have a compulsory part for question 1, and then in part 2 they have a choice, but they need to answer 1 of the questions. And as you would expect, we can see the difficulty of this increases as we go through the levels. And with the B2 first and the C1, we have that essay question at the beginning in part 1. If we just take a step back and think what all of these tasks involve, we can see that all of them have a clear context for the writing, and this helps give a clear reason to write for the learners. There's clear word limits. There's prompts to support the learners. And I would argue that these tasks are all fairly real world and authentic. The genres of text which the candidates are expected to produce are genres of text that they could be realistically expected to produce at some point in life. Now, when it comes to marking exam practice, and also I normally integrate this into my lessons even if I'm not preparing my learners for an exam. I think it's important that we bear in mind the Cambridge Writing Assessment Scales. As I'm sure you're all aware, when candidates' work is marked or assessed by the examiner, they will be awarded marks for content, communicative achievement, organization, and language. And as we see, as we go up through those levels of exam, what's expected of the learner goes up accordingly. I often prepare my learners for the exam by giving them feedback based on these 4 criteria. So if my learners do some writing and hand it in to me, I have some little slips of paper with content, communicative achievement, organization, language, and I just write some comments for each one. Sometimes I don't even give them the score. What I do is I write my comments and then I ask them to read the comments and then look back at their writing and tell me what score they think they got before I give them the score in a numerical form. I think this is quite important because I don't know about you, but I've noticed often if we give learners just a grade or a score, they're less likely to read any fuller, any qualitative feedback that you give them. So I always try to get them to read my comments and think before I give them a score. And that can be really helpful in terms of getting them to think about what they've achieved in their writing and how they could improve it. Turning to complete, I have here the map of the units from complete first, and we can see that there are writing tasks in every unit of the book. So this is just really, again, really useful for preparing our learners for the exam. They get lots of writing practice. You can see there's plenty of practice of the part 1 essay, which we know they will have to do, but they're also introduced to the other genres that they need to be able to write in for part 2. If we just look at how the writing is presented in the book, we can see here with this example task, there's an introduction to the task where the learners have to analyze the writing question. Again, this is essential exam technique, being able to unpack the question and realize what they have to do in order to get good marks for the content of their writing. There's then some work here on planning. Again, something which is essential when it comes to writing. This particular section is about how to write a good introductory paragraph to the writing. So there's some work on that where, again, that they have examples, they need to analyze them, they need to think what would an examiner see when they're marking. And so, again, it's getting them to think like, who's the reader of my writing? How do I write with them in mind? And then we have some useful language before moving on to actually writing their own essay. Another thing about complete is that whenever there's some exam practice, there's also some useful exam advice as well. So the writing is I think is scaffolded quite well. So the learners are given opportunities to develop how they think about writing before they practice the writing task. Because so many of all of these exam writing tasks are ultimately based on some form of genre, there are also writing sections in the book which take a genre approach. So here, for example, we can see again, there's some analysis of the question. There's some time to plan, like to ideate, to come up with ideas. Again, this is something which learners often have issues with in the exam. Even learners who can write quite well might have issues with being able to generate the ideas. So there's plenty of practice of that included in the material. There's then a model answer, and there is some analysis of that model answer. This continues then with practicing some of that language that they've looked at in the analysis before then writing their own version of the text. So a variety of approaches towards writing are included in the material. And again, we have our exam advice. In addition, there's a writing bank towards the back of the book, and this writing bank contains really useful information which the learners can use as a reference for each of the genres of writing that they would be expected to do in the exam. So for example, here we have the material for writing the part 1 essay. And here we have an example of the email or letter. And again, you can see that there's a model task, a model answer, there's useful key language, which we would expect to be used for that genre. So again, these are just really useful resources which can help our learners prepare for the exam and see what they need to include in their writing. We have a similar issue with speaking. So again, we can see in the exam, the difficulty of the speaking tasks goes up according to the level. So for our preliminary exam takers in speaking part 2, they just need to talk about what they see in the images, for example, or they only need to talk about the activities and which one they think would be the most relaxing. But then when we move up a level for the B2, all of a sudden they now need to compare 2 different photographs, and they need to just think a bit more deeply about the images. So here, think how important it is to help people in these situations. They also have a collaborative task where they need to speculate about how, in this case, how some ideas could help a town attract more tourists. Getting to an even higher level at C1, we've now got 3 pictures, but they only need to talk about 2 of them. And again, notice the speculative language here. How might the students react to these different ways of learning? How effective might these ways of learning be? So I think definitely one thing we need to practice when we're preparing our learners for the speaking exam is, especially at the high levels, just speculative language. So if we can get our learners practicing speculation, ideally using a variety of different ways. So speculating using modal verbs like might, could, but also there's other ways as well, like perhaps, it's possible that. And if they can just mix that up and not only rely on one form of speculation, that will go really far to proving to the examiner that they have the range of vocabulary and grammar that fits a C1 level speaker. One thing I've often done in lessons is I've always tried to include some type of speaking task like this in every lesson when we get quite close to the exam. I find most of the tasks in the speaking exam are related in some way to real life situations. So in part 1, where you have those basic sort of like getting to know you type questions, well, we often have to answer questions like that in real life. In part 3, where you have that collaborative task, again, it's quite normal to interact with other people and have a conversation about something. But this part, in part 2, is just, it's not very natural to talk about 2 out of 3 pictures in the space of 1 minute and speculate. So I think the more practice we can give of this in the classroom, the better prepared our learners will be when they come to take the exam. If you use some of the exam preparation material I looked at earlier, there's lots of pictures there that you can use. But one thing I've done is I've actually asked my learners to bring some magazines into class, and I've got them to cut out pictures, and we've put them on pieces of paper, and they've written a couple of questions like how might, how da da da, and they've swapped it with another group, and they've practiced the exam that way. So I quite like that because it just gave them the chance to create their own questions, and I think they found that quite motivating. So again, looking at complete, again, every unit contains some exam speaking practice. And if we look at an example here, the the task in the book begins just with some work to activate the learner's schematic knowledge of the topic. There's then some language input. So here we've got useful phrases for use in the discussion. There's then the speaking task itself. And so again, I think this is just, it's been scaffolded quite nicely. You're not just turning to the learners and saying, speak, you're giving them time to think about the topic, looking at some useful language, preparing what they might say, and then actually doing it. So it really does help them prepare for the exam in a very structured way. And as always, we have a useful exam tip as well. I find learners often need practice of those productive skills for the exam, but that sometimes we do need to help them prepare for the reading and listening as well. Today, just because of time, I thought we could perhaps look at one part of the listening exam. So in all of the exams, in the listening, there's some type of question like this, where the candidates have to complete some notes based on a monologue that they hear. If we look here, we have an example from the preliminary exam. Again, there's listening included in all of the units. So I found this type of question in complete preliminary. And again, as you can see, there's some sort of pre-listening work to help activate the learner's schematic knowledge. And if we look, there's also a post-listening task involved as well. So although exam practice is very much the main focus of this page from the book, it's being approached in a way where, again, the learners are being supported and they're being given an opportunity to reflect on the content of what they've heard after the listening. There's also our old friend, the exam advice. So if we just look here at these questions, I think one thing I normally do when I'm preparing learners for the exam is I get them to really analyze the question. Now, I think we could all take a look at these and probably quite easily identify the type of word we're listening for. So, for example, meet your guide outside. We know it's going to be some kind of place. But we can sometimes use the context to go a little bit deeper. So one thing that I'll often do is I ask my learners, before we listen, I ask them to identify the type of word they're looking for, but also to make some guesses. And what we do is we write the guesses down the side of the board. And we do this for all of the questions where that's realistic. I think if we look here, for example, the email address and the phone number, we can't really guess, but the others, we can. So I do that because when we're doing feedback afterwards, very often, like some of the things that they've guessed will be the answers. And I like that because it just shows to them that a lot of listening is about predicting. And if they're able to do that in the exam, it just helps prepare them that little bit more for what they're about to listen to. Another thing which is useful for this type of listening is to look around the gap and try and identify any keywords which might signal to the learners that the answer is coming. So here, for example, meet your guide outside somewhere. So I often ask them, as well as thinking about not just what type of words the answers are, but what the answers might actually be, try and get them to identify these little words that will trigger their understanding that the answer is coming next. Again, with the higher levels, it's quite important. I find once you've underlined these keywords, try and brainstorm some synonyms for these words. It's quite likely, especially in the B2 and the C1 level exam, that those keywords might appear in the form either of a synonym or possibly an antonym of that word. I think just looking at the time, I don't think we have time to do this task together, but I hope you can see that this is just kind of using the material in the book to squeeze that little bit more exam technique and like an exam practice out of that material. If your learners perhaps find this challenging, or if they have issues kind of listening for these keywords that signal that the answer is coming, one thing you can do, and quite easily if you're using Complete, is on Cambridge One, you have very easy access to the tape script. So or audio script, I should say. So you can ask the students to look at the audio script and identify what those synonyms or what those little clues were in the recording that they should have heard as the little triggers. And again, if we just do that, just again and again after these kind of listening tasks, then we're really teaching them that skill of listening for those keywords or words which mean something similar. So I'll just quickly
Unit 4. Listening, Part 3.
Quickly finish
Exercise
this.
3.
You will hear a woman talking to a group of
there we go.
young people about the bushcraft courses she...
Unit 4.
There we go. Okay. So, turning to the use of English, again, one of the types of question which appears in all levels of the exam is this type. It's the multiple choice close. So, I've got here again. We've got reading and use of English throughout the book. I've got an example here. And again, we can see it's introduced with a task. Here it's a prediction task. And again, I think this is, again, getting them to practice something that's useful for the exam. If they're going to tackle this question effectively in the exam, it's always good if they just quickly read through the text before they start answering, just so they have an idea of like the feel of the text, because that might help them when it comes to selecting some of the options. This is particularly the case with the higher level exams, because there might be things to do with the writer's point of view or nuance there that they will have a much better idea of if they look at the bigger picture of the text. There's also follow-up questions, again, allowing them to reflect on what they've read. And also it's an opportunity to perhaps recycle some of the language which they've encountered in the task itself. So if we look here, we've got the task. Again, just with an eye on the time, I won't ask you to do this, but if we look at the answers, you'll see that at this level, at B2 level, a lot of the answers relate to either set phrases or collocations. And I think a good thing we can do is once you've done this task with the class, get them to just look around those gaps and just underline the either the phrasal verbs or the collocations that they've used that were the correct answers, and get them to practice using those. You're showing them the importance of these linguistic features in context. So why not just get them to use them independently? Now that brings me on to language development. So I mentioned earlier that Complete was designed as a course for learners who are preparing for an exam, but who also need to develop their level of language in order to be able to take that exam. And I think it really is important that we try to get as much out of exam preparation as we can to help develop their language. So that's why, for example, going back here, I suggested reflecting on the collocations and phrasal verbs which were included in this exercise. Remember, the level of language which is being tested in the exam is the sort of language that we want our learners, roughly, more or less, to be able to produce. So it's an amazing source of language which we can ask our learners to look at in more detail. If we look at how language development is approached in Complete, we can see here an example of, we've got the first 2 double pages of a unit. You can see that we have some material called starting off. So there's always something to introduce the topic of the unit to the learners. This is a good opportunity for you as a teacher, maybe to see how much your learners already know about the topic of the unit. And then normally in the book, there's often like some listening or some reading as the first exam practice task. And what's great about this is that the content and the language in that reading or listening is then often used to create the context in which there's some language development work. So we can see here on the next page, the listening task is immediately followed by some vocabulary work, by some grammar work on no, none, and not, but also the passive. So the book itself takes this approach to language development, often using the context provided by the exam practice material to focus on a particular area of vocabulary or grammar. The eagle-eyed amongst you will probably notice that in the no, none, not section of the grammar, there's in exercise 2, there's that little logo below the exercise number. So this logo relates to the Cambridge English corpus. So obviously at Cambridge, we've been preparing learners for the exams and also running the exams for many years. So we have a large corpus of data about what mistakes, what errors learners often make in the exam with respect to particular features of language. And that knowledge has been put to good use in this book because these sections just highlight to you as the teacher that these are areas of language which learners often make mistakes with in the exam. So Not only is the exam material in the book being used to present new language, but also the knowledge that we have from past exams is used just to really focus on areas of language which learners might need some extra help with based on that knowledge. Another resource we have for developing learners' language is English Grammar in Use. English Grammar in Use is quite a popular book. It contains lots of grammatical features of English, often graded for different levels. And it's been around for 40 years, so it's one of our like longest lasting publications. I think it's now in its 5th edition. So it has been, well, updated over that time. If we look here, we can see we have an example from the book. I've selected something on the present perfect, and you can see that it's graded. So there's A, B, C, and D. So you can see it starts off with like a simple explanation and a simple use, but then it adds more detail to it as it goes on up through the letters. You can buy English Grammar in Use as just one book, but there are also some other books which have been targeted at particular levels. So you can have like English Grammar in Use Advanced, for example. These books are in like hard copy form, but they're also available on Cambridge One. And I've found over the years that quite a few of my students have found these just really good sources of just extra practice on particular grammar points. Similarly, there's also English Vocabulary in Use. This is, it follows a similar pattern to English Grammar in Use, but this time it's graded for different levels. So there's pre-intermediate and intermediate, upper intermediate, and advanced. And these books contain useful vocabulary practice, and the vast majority of the vocabulary is done based on topic areas. So there'll be a page, for example, on cooking, a page on holidays, for example. And again, it's just a good source of extra practice for you and also your learners. Now, earlier I touched on those 4 criteria for marking writing. And I think out of those 4 criteria, one area where candidates often struggle is language. So that's why I included this language development section at the end of the presentation. And in my experience, although we can do a lot as teachers to try and develop our learners' language in the classroom, it's one of those things where just the more our learners are exposed to authentic language outside the classroom, the better their English is likely to be. Whenever I've taught exam preparation courses, it's always been very clear to me after like a month or 2, which students are reading English or listening to English outside of class and which ones aren't. And over a whole academic year, that effect just really compounds. And if you think about it, when we looked earlier at that multiple choice close, our learners, they need to have this feel for collocations, for phrasal verbs, knowing whether they need a verb is followed by an infinitive or a gerund, for example. And all of these things, we can review them in class. Sometimes we can teach them, but arguably they need to at least be reinforced or even encouraged just by lots of reading, lots of exposure to the language. And with that in mind, I thought we could quickly touch on the Cambridge English Readers. So these are like a series of fiction books. Cambridge produce them at a variety of levels, from starter all the way to advanced, and they've been written with teenagers mainly in mind, so that they should find them interesting. And what's nice is they've been graded to that level, so it's just right for them. And it also contains some additional tasks they can do if they want to do them. But it's just a really nice way of encouraging your learners to start reading extensively outside the classroom. So I've included a QR code there for you. If any of you have slightly younger learners, for primary age learners, we do have some anthologies. I've included just a picture here of level 6, which is around intermediate level. So it's possible that if you do have some younger learners who are preparing for a Cambridge exam, this is something that might help with that extensive reading. Just turning to some resources from Cambridge, which you might find. Oh, sorry. Okay. That you might find useful. I've included some QR codes to the websites for each of the exams. At these websites, you can download a sample exam, but there's also some practice material, both for candidates but also for teachers. And in the teachers section, one of the things you can do is you can download some useful ideas, some tips for teaching each part of the exam. But you can also download the Teacher's Handbook, which is a really valuable resource. I find it's particularly useful if you want to get used to start marking writing, because there are some sample questions, but also some sample answers from the examiner. Sorry, some sample comments from the examiner on the sample answers, and you can see which marks the candidates were given and why. And it can just help you when it comes to judging how you should mark your learners. There's also a general exam preparation website from Cambridge. Here's the QR code, and also a catalogue of Cambridge publications that you can take a look at. I think one final thing would be, we have the Cambridge Online Dictionary. This can be quite useful for teachers and learners. As a teacher, I've used it sometimes when I've wanted to create my own materials, and I just want to double check like what level a word is at. But it can also be useful for our learners, not just because it can help them see what a word means, but there's also that British English and American English pronunciation sample at the top, so they can hear how the word would sound in either British or American English. So again, I have the code there. In terms of writing, there's a Write and Improve site from Cambridge, which again, it really helps with developing learners' writing skills. So I'd recommend you take a look at that. And there's also our Virtually Anywhere, where there are some other free resources for for helping you improve your learners' level of English. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ben, once again. It was very great. Have a nice evening, everybody.